Good evening, I'm Britt Clennett in Hong Kong and welcome to ViuTV News. Coming up on tonight's show. Pyongyang launches a ballistic missile again. The US signs a record-breaking arms deal with Saudi Arabia as President Trump begins his first overseas trip since taking office. 6 weeks ahead of Carrie Lam's inauguration, she reveals difficulties in finding people willing to join her cabinet. Well, North Korea fired a ballistic missile this afternoon, the second of its kind since South Korean President Moon Jae-in took office 11 days ago. The missile, which South Korean officials say reached an altitude of about 560 kilometres, was launched from a location northeast of Pyongyang. Japan says the missile landed outside its exclusive economic zone and no damage to ships or airplanes was reported. Tokyo and Seoul both spoke out against the missile launch.
North Korea launched the ballistic missile despite strong warnings from the international community. They have trampled on efforts by the international community to find a peaceful solution, and this is a challenge to the world.
Well, with less than 2 months to go before taking office, Chief Executive-elect Carrie Lam has yet to form a full cabinet. Lam says she's faced difficulties in the process of recruitment. Not everyone is keen to serve in the government. There is a lot for candidates to consider before committing to office, she says. But the incoming leader is optimistic about her progress and expressed confidence to form a pragmatic team. Meanwhile, Lam said her husband, Lam Seul-po, will not serve in any public organisations because he wants to keep a low profile. Meanwhile, pro-establishment DAB party called on the new leader to budget more for teachers and subsidising kindergarten tuitions. This comes after Carrie Lam promised an increase to recurrent education spending by $5 billion. DAB lawmaker Horace Chung suggested parental education and tuition subsidies for self-financing tertiary programs. He said he's confident LegCo will approve the additional funding before the summer recess in mid-July, as both sides of the bench have little disagreements on the proposal.
Certainly that will not be a final solution for all the problems in the education, but we hope that it will be a good start of the chief executive and showed her determination in resolving the problems in the education sector.
The League of Social Democrats marched the streets today, accusing the chief executive of interfering with a Legislative Council investigation. Carrying banners, around 20 protesters made their way to the Government House. They criticised the CE for secretly amending documents on the proposed scope of the investigation and accused Leung of colluding with pro-establishment lawmaker Holden Chow to mislead the probe. Meanwhile, CY Leung has repeated calls on his blog for accountancy sector lawmaker Kenneth Leung to quit the investigation. It's the fourth consecutive day that he's taken to the internet to voice his stance. As controversies swell over in Washington, it was down to business for US President Donald Trump on his trip to the Saudi Arabian capital of Riyadh. A record-breaking $110 billion in arms was signed with the kingdom. Despite the lavish sword dance ceremony and a civilian honour bestowed by King Salman, attention was all on the multi-billion-dollar arms agreement, the biggest made in US history. The deal commits the Gulf country looking to diversify its economy away from oil to purchasing all kinds of military equipment, from tanks and helicopters to radar and cybersecurity systems. Altogether, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said the US signed trade agreements worth $350 billion.
Tremendous investments into the United States, and our military community is very happy, and we want to thank you and Saudi Arabia, but hundreds of billions of dollars of investments into the United States, and jobs, jobs, jobs.
While he may be meeting with world leaders overseas this week, things aren't so rosy at home for President Donald Trump. There are signs he's facing growing isolation in Washington, with fellow Republicans in Congress distancing themselves from the president amid a string of scandals. Donald Trump's warm welcome in Saudi Arabia Saturday comes as the American president faces increasing isolation in Washington. Lawmakers from Trump's own Republican Party showing signs of going their own way in an effort to salvage what they can of a healthcare and tax reform agenda amid signs that scandals embroiling the White House aren't likely to die down anytime soon. News reports Friday that investigators have identified a senior White House advisor as a person of interest in a probe into alleged collusion between Trump's campaign and Russian agents, further fueling concerns from Republicans in Congress that they will continue to be forced to defend the administration, distracting them from pursuing their legislative goals. Some have complained that a lack of communication from the White House has left GOP lawmakers frustrated. Republican Richard Burr of the Senate Intelligence Committee telling Reuters he could not get through to the administration after news broke that Trump had shared highly classified information with Russia's foreign minister. At the same time, White House aides telling Reuters they feel abandoned by Republicans on Capitol Hill amid the furor over the firing of FBI Director James Comey and allegations that Trump tried to influence the Bureau's probe into possible Russian links to the administration. The White House did not respond to requests for comment on this story. Trump is on a 10-day trip to the Middle East and Europe, his first foreign visit as president. Thousands of Houthi followers in Yemen took to the streets to protest against US President Donald Trump's visit to neighbouring Saudi Arabia. Demonstrators held Yemeni flags and banners as they marched across the country's capital, Sana'a, denouncing Israel and the US. This after a Saudi-backed Sunni Arab coalition said it had intercepted a rocket fired by Houthi rebels. The impoverished state has been embroiled in a near 2-year-old turmoil as the Gulf Arab coalition battles the Iran-allied Houthi movement.
We are here today to say no for terrorism, no for American terrorism. And we are here to say to Trump, you kill Yemenis with Saudi hands. You support Qaeda ISIS by supporting Saudi Wahhabi regime.
Iranians elected incumbent President Hassan Rouhani for a second time after a record turnout at the polls. The result, a bitter rejection to hardliner populism. Sasha O'Donoghue has the story.
A clear rejection of populism in Iran. President Hassan Rouhani winning the presidential election, handing an emphatic defeat to his hardline rival, Ebrahim Raisi. The incumbent president, who first took power in 2013, won the election with 23.5 million votes to his rival's 15.8 million. Raisi had hoped to draw on economic discontent in the Islamic Republic to gain votes. Touted as the darling of conservative hawks, his populist approach appeared to put off potential voters. Instead, Rouhani's rejection of Iran's nuclear program in favour of strengthening ties with the West won votes among those who want a stable, non-violent country. During weeks of campaigning, the two main candidates exchanged accusations of corruption and brutality in unprecedentedly hostile television debates. Turnout at around 70%, with Rouhani winning 57% of the votes. For Iranians, the election presented a stark choice between competing visions of the country. Despite doubts about Rouhani, the prospect of victory by Raisi, who was one of 4 judges in the 1980s that approved the death sentences of thousands of political prisoners, was enough to drive concerned Iranians to vote for the current president in force. It was a contest between rural conservatives with economic grievances and urbanites looking for a progressive agenda, an election resembling recent battlegrounds in Europe and the United States. But it was the nationalist and not the populist camp that won over voters in the end.
Meanwhile, the US Secretary of State has called on Hassan Rouhani to end the country's ballistic missile program and end its network of terrorism. Speaking at a joint news conference with his Saudi counterpart in Riyadh, Rex Tillerson insists this has to be done if Iran wants to change its relationship with the rest of the world. He added the US intends to intensify its efforts to deter Tehran in Syria and Yemen, countries where Washington and Iran side with opposing forces. Next up, the latest from the world of business. Toshiba's chip business is still up for grabs, and according to people with knowledge of the matter, US buyout firm Bain Capital plans to bid around $13.5 billion for a majority stake in the lucrative unit. Ciara Lee has the story.
The suitors are lining up as the second round deadline for Toshiba's chip business nears. Sources say US chipmaker Broadcom, which has teamed up with private equity firm Silver Lake, and US buyout firm Bain Capital, which has partnered South Korean chipmaker SK Hynix, will bid. Private equity firm KKR is also thought to be in the running. Toshiba, which values its chip unit at least $18 billion, was forced to put its prized asset on the block this year. It suffered dramatic cost overruns at its now bankrupt US nuclear unit, leaving it scrambling for cash. Selling the chip unit is critical for the company's recovery.
Its ongoing future as a listed company on Tokyo equity indices is largely reflective on a shoring up of its balance sheet and dealing with these latent issues which obviously relate back to its Westinghouse holdings. So it is necessary that the company needs to facilitate asset sales in order to boost its balance sheet. So as we get to this second deadline in terms of the bidding process, it is clear that the company needs funds.
Bain plans to bid around 1.5 trillion yen, or $13 billion, for a majority stake, people familiar with the matter have said. The offer would allow Toshiba and the management of the memory chip business to own a sizable holding, but much of the sale and its outcome is still uncertain. Business partner Western Digital, another suitor for the chip unit, is seeking to block any sale that does not have its consent. And the Japanese government has made it clear that it's prepared to block any sale that could see the highly valued chip technology industry leave the country.
US heavy machinery maker John Deere surprised investors with a bigger than expected second quarter profit as sales rose for the first time in more than 3 years. The positive figures come amidst rising demand for the company's farm and construction equipment. Such positive results serve as a strong boost to Deere's profit outlook this year. The firm forecasts sales in South America to grow and that in North America to fall less than previously estimated. Japan's richest man, Masayoshi Son, is set to follow in the footsteps of US President Donald Trump. The head of SoftBank Group, Son, travelled to Riyadh this weekend, where he's expected to announce the close of a fundraising round for what will be the world's biggest private equity fund. The $100 billion investment is backed by the likes of Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund and Apple. About 37,000 workers from American telecom giant AT&T went on strike this weekend. The move came after employees failed to reach an agreement with the country's second largest carrier over new contracts. Union workers are demanding higher wages to cover rising healthcare costs.